Once a proud Ranger-General of Silvermoon, Sylvanas Windrunner stood as the guardian of her people, the embodiment of elven grace, courage, and discipline. But fate can be cruel, and hers would become one of the darkest and most tragic tales in all of Azeroth. Her story is one of transformation, from hero to monster, from protector to the Banshee Queen. Betrayal, vengeance, and power shaped her path, each choice pulling her further from the light she once defended. Throughout her journey, Sylvanas faced horrors that would break even the strongest of souls. Yet she never yielded. From the ruins of Silvermoon to the throne of the Forsaken, from her rebellion against the Lich King to her war against the living, her name became both feared and revered. Love, loss, hatred, and defiance all burned within her like an unending flame. This is not merely the story of a villain nor that of a hero. It's the story of a woman who defied life and death itself, carving her destiny in defiance of gods and kings alike. So, if you are ready to uncover the truth behind the dark legend of Sylvanas Windrunner, her rise, her fall, and the shadow she cast upon Azeroth, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join me as we begin this haunting journey into her entire story. Before she became the Banshee Queen, Sylvanas Windrunner was a child of Teldrassil, a realm of golden light and eternal spring. The forests of Eversong whispered with magic, and the spires of Silvermoon shimmered beneath a sky forever kissed by sunlight. It was a kingdom of elegance and ancient power, untouched by the corruption of the outside world. In this place of beauty and serenity, the Windrunner family stood proud among the High Elves, noble in blood and steadfast in duty. Sylvanas was the middle of three sisters, Alleria, the fierce and daring adventurer, and Verisa, the youngest and most spirited of them all. From a young age, Sylvanas showed a fiery determination that set her apart. Where others admired the tranquility of Silvermoon, she yearned for the thrill of the wilds. Her heart belonged to the forests, to the hunt, to the endless challenge of mastering bow and blade. She trained under the Fast Riders, the elite rangers sworn to protect Teldrassil from any who dared trespass its borders. Among them, she excelled. Her senses were sharp, her reflexes precise, and her resolve unshakable. She studied under Ranger-General Windrunner, her mother and mentor, who taught her that a ranger's duty was not merely to fight, but to embody grace, vigilance, and unity with the land. "The bow is not just a weapon," Larissa once said to her. "It is a promise that you will stand between your people and the darkness beyond." Sylvanas carried those words like a sacred vow. As the years passed, her skill and leadership became legendary. She commanded respect even from veterans twice her age. While Alleria ventured beyond Teldrassil to confront the rising Horde, Sylvanas remained, a steadfast guardian of her homeland. She coordinated patrols across the borders, ensured that the runestones shielding the forest remained untouched, and trained new generations of rangers to stand watch. Every arrow she loosed was guided by pride and precision, each strike a testament to her devotion to her people. When the Second War erupted and the Orcish Horde invaded the Eastern Kingdoms, Sylvanas led her rangers in the defense of the forests. Under her command, ambushes were swift and deadly, her troops striking like shadows and vanishing before the enemy could react. Though the High Elves had long withdrawn from the affairs of men, Sylvanas understood that the tides of war would not respect the boundaries of their enchanted kingdom. Her efforts earned her great renown, and when her mother stepped down as Ranger-General, the choice of successor was clear. Sylvanas Windrunner, young, bold, and relentless, took up the mantle with pride. As Ranger-General of Silvermoon, she became the symbol of elven valor. Her authority stretched across the Fast Riders, her word law among the rangers who served her. To the citizens of Silvermoon, she was the perfect union of beauty and strength, a commander who could inspire courage with a glance and silence fear with a single word. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Sylvanas carried the same spark that had always defined her, an unyielding defiance against fate itself. She believed Teldrassil would stand forever. The Sunwell, the heart of elven power, shone brightly, feeding the kingdom with arcane energy and eternal life. The forests bloomed, the cities prospered, and the rangers kept the borders safe. To Sylvanas, the idea of true danger felt distant, like a nightmare that could never reach the light of Silvermoon. Her focus remained on discipline, honor, and the quiet pride of service. She took joy in the laughter of her sisters when they returned from their journeys, in the sight of the scarlet leaves swaying above Windrunner Spire, and in the belief that her homeland was eternal. But destiny had already begun to stir beyond the borders. Dark whispers spread from the north, of a plague consuming the lands of men, of armies of the dead marching without rest or mercy. While others dismissed these tales as mortal misfortunes, Sylvanas listened. Her instincts, sharpened by years of battle, told her that a storm was coming, one unlike any her people had ever faced. For now, though, Quel'Thalas remained a paradise. Its rivers glimmered like liquid gold, and its songs carried on the wind like memories of an age untouched by sorrow. Sylvanas walked those forests with pride, her bow in hand, her people safe under her watch. She could not yet imagine that soon, that same land, the land she vowed to protect, would burn, and that she, its greatest guardian, would be forced to face a darkness that would change her forever. The peace of Quel'Thalas shattered when the sky darkened with smoke, and the scent of death drifted from the south. Word came swiftly. Lordaeron had fallen, its people slaughtered, its cities reduced to ruin by the undead scourge. But it was not the Lich King who led this march of death. It was Arthas Menethil, once the proud prince of Lordaeron, now a servant of Frostmourne. The boy who had sworn to protect his kingdom had become the herald of its destruction, and his gaze turned north, to the radiant lands of the High Elves. Sylvanas Windrunner was among the first to sense the coming dread. Her rangers watched from the borders as blackened fields marked the scourge's advance. She knew the undead would not stop at the human kingdoms. The protective runestones that concealed Quel'Thalas from mortal eyes had stood for centuries. But Arthas wielded powers that transcended mortal limits. The forest barriers that had defied armies would not deter a death knight armed with necromantic fury. When the first ranks of the scourge reached the outer woods, Sylvanas met them with steel and fire. Her rangers struck from the shadows, arrows finding their marks in rotting flesh. Every ambush was calculated, every retreat measured. She burned bridges and collapsed tunnels, buying precious time for her people. Yet for every undead soldier she destroyed, 2 more rose in its place. The plague did not need to conquer, it only needed to consume. Still, Sylvanas refused to yield. She coordinated the defenses of the Elf Gates, ancient fortresses guarding the entrance to the heart of Quel'Thalas. Her voice carried over the chaos, commanding with unwavering precision. The first gate fell only after days of brutal combat, its defenders torn apart but unbroken in spirit. The second held longer, drenched in blood and frost as Sylvanas herself fought upon the ramparts. Her bow singing death into the endless horde, she moved like a spirit among her enemies, swift, relentless, her defiance glowing as bright as the sunwell itself. Arthas, however, was no ordinary invader. His undead legions did not tire, and his patience was infinite. Every skirmish bled Sylvanas's forces thinner. The fast riders were elite, but they could not match an army that could not die. When the final gate fell, Sylvanas led a desperate retreat toward Silvermoon. She knew that if Arthas reached the Sunwell, her kingdom would be doomed. Every step she took, every command she issued was driven by the single, unbreakable thought: Quel'Thalas must not fall. The battle that followed was merciless. Forests that had sung with life for millennia now burned, their beauty devoured by the frost of undeath. Sylvanas herself faced Arthas on the blood-soaked fields near the Sunwell Plateau. She fought with a ferocity that even he had not expected, striking from the trees, evading his deadly strikes, her arrows burning with arcane light. She wounded him once, but Frostmourne did not allow its master to falter. The cursed blade cut through her defenses and tore her life away in a single, chilling instant. As her vision dimmed, Sylvanas felt only rage. Rage that her people would die. Rage that she had failed to stop the monster who had once been human. Her last sight was of the banners of Silvermoon falling into ruin, her homeland consumed by shadow. But death was not her end. Arthas, in his cruelty, denied her the peace of the afterlife. He ordered her body defiled and her spirit bound in eternal torment. From the remnants of her soul he forged a weapon of vengeance, a banshee enslaved to his will. Sylvanas awoke to a nightmare beyond imagination. Her voice, once a command that inspired armies, now echoed in shrieks of anguish. Her body was gone, her essence twisted into spectral form, her freedom ripped away. Trapped within the will of the Lich King, Sylvanas became a tool of destruction, forced to turn her fury upon her own people. The forest she once protected became hunting grounds for her new master. She watched helplessly as the scourge raised Silvermoon, and the Sunwell, the heart of her people's magic, was corrupted and destroyed to resurrect Kel-Thuzad. The light of Quel'Thalas was extinguished, and the High Elves who survived would never be the same. Deep within her prison of undeath, a spark of Sylvanas' old self remained, a whisper of rage, an ember of defiance. She could not act, she could not resist, but she remembered. She remembered every life stolen, every scream, every flame that consumed her homeland. The hatred she felt for Arthas Menethil became the anchor of her soul. And though she did not yet know how, one truth burned brighter than the rest. She would make him suffer. She would have her vengeance, even if it took an eternity. Sylvanas Windrunner was dead, yet she lived. Her body was gone, her heart stilled, but her soul remained, twisted into a form that mocked everything she had once been. Where once there had been beauty, there was now only horror. Her laughter had become a shriek that curdled blood. Her eyes burned with cold, unnatural light, and her will was no longer her own. Bound to the Lich King's power through the cruel hand of Arthas, Sylvanas became a banshee, a ghostly servant of the scourge, chained by magic stronger than death itself. For days, weeks, perhaps months, she could not tell, her mind was drowned beneath waves of agony. She was aware of her body's movements but powerless to stop them. Her voice called out orders she did not will. Her spectral arrows struck down allies she once swore to protect. Her torment was both physical and spiritual, the constant piercing pull of Frostmourn's domination, and the unrelenting knowledge that her hands were soaked with the blood of her own kin. Every act of destruction carved deeper into what remained of her spirit. She watched herself burn the forests of Eversong, heard the cries of dying rangers, saw the Sunwell's light extinguished, and she could do nothing. The scourge moved as one, an army of corpses bound to the Lich King's endless hunger. In that dark legion, individuality was meaningless. Each soul was another voice lost within the chorus of undeath. Yet somewhere, buried deep within the anguish, Sylvanas' hatred endured. It was the last piece of her that Arthas had failed to destroy. That hatred kept her conscious. It fed her, nurtured her, gave her reason to exist when all else was stripped away. While most of the undead drifted through their existence in silence, Sylvanas remembered. She remembered Silvermoon's sun-drenched spires. She remembered the faces of her sisters, the sound of laughter in the forests, the feel of wind through her hair as she rode with the fast riders. Those memories, once cherished, now burned like poison, reminders of everything she had lost and of who had taken it from her. When Arthas ordered her to march against the remnants of Quel'Thalas, she obeyed, but every command filled her with a hatred that seethed beneath the surface. She began to test the limits of her control. Tiny acts of resistance, a hesitation before carrying out an order, a flicker of thought that was not his. The Lich King's grip was powerful, but it was not perfect. Within that imperfection, Sylvanas found the faintest trace of freedom. It was like breathing through a crack in a sealed tomb, small, fleeting, but enough to remind her that she still existed. In the silence of the undead ranks, she began to listen, not to Arthas, but to the whispers of other souls around her. Some banshees, like her, retained echoes of their former selves. Some wept in torment, some screamed endlessly, and some she sensed were beginning to think. Slowly she began to reach out, to plant thoughts of rebellion, fragments of identity, reminders that they were not merely weapons, they were stolen lives. It was a dangerous game. The Lich King's awareness stretched across his entire army, and any sign of defiance could mean annihilation. Yet Sylvanas' cunning had not died with her body. She hid her thoughts beneath layers of submission, feigned obedience while her hatred grew sharper than any blade. Even in death, she learned how to endure pain, how to conceal it, and how to turn it into power. When Arthas marched west toward Lordaeron, Sylvanas followed, a ghost in his shadow. She watched him slaughter his own father, watched him desecrate the throne room she had once visited as an emissary of her people. Every atrocity hardened her resolve. The man she had once known as a prince now wore death like a crown, and she understood that he was beyond redemption. If there was any justice left in existence, she would be the one to bring him ruin. But the chains still bound her. The Lich King's power was vast, his will absolute. It seemed impossible that she could ever be free, until something unexpected began to change in the north. Far away, atop the frozen throne, the Lich King's strength began to wane. The control he exerted over his servants weakened, and within that fracture, Sylvanas felt a flicker of opportunity. For the first time since her death, her thoughts were entirely her own. The fog of domination lifted, and she could feel again rage, pain, purpose. Freedom was still distant, but its scent filled the air like the first breath of dawn. She would not waste it. She would endure the torment a little longer, bide her time, and wait for the perfect moment to strike back. In the endless darkness of undeath, where all hope should have died, a spark of rebellion was born. Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger-General, Banshee prisoner, began to awaken once more. And though her soul was scarred beyond repair, one truth had never changed. She would have her vengeance no matter the cost. The world trembled as the power of the Lich King began to falter. From the icy crown of Northrend, the once absolute will that bound the scourge started to fracture. The link between master and servant, between Arthas and the countless undead he commanded, weakened, like cracks forming in an ancient wall. For the first time since her death, Sylvanas Windrunner felt the weight of his control slipping. It was faint at first, like a breeze brushing across the ashes of her soul. But she felt it, and she knew what it meant. Freedom was near. Arthas had overextended his power. His conquest of Lordaeron had spread the scourge too thin, and the whispers of rebellion among his ranks grew louder. While he turned his gaze toward distant campaigns, his grip on individual minds loosened. Sylvanas sensed the change instantly. The commands that once forced her into motion no longer carried the same unyielding authority. For the first time in years, she could resist, even hesitate. That hesitation became thought, and that thought became intent. She began to act subtly, concealing her newfound independence. The Banshees who still followed her sensed something different in their queen. They too felt the Lich King's voice fading into silence, and they turned to her for guidance. One by one, Sylvanas reached out to them, rekindling fragments of their lost selves. "Remember who you were," she whispered in the stillness of night. "We are not his slaves, not anymore." Those words spread like wildfire among the restless dead. When Arthas's control finally broke, it was as if a shroud had been torn from the world. The scourge fell into chaos, mindless undead wandering without direction, their purpose lost. But Sylvanas, sharp and cunning even in death, did not waste a moment. She gathered those who still possessed fragments of will, banshees, skeletons, ghosts, and ghouls alike. To them, she offered something they had not known in years: choice. "We have all suffered beneath the Lich King's command," she told them. "But now we are free, and we will take this world for ourselves." With vengeance burning in her soul, Sylvanas turned her attention to Arthas. She would not run nor hide, she would strike back. In the ruins of Lordaeron, she laid her trap. Using guile and shadow, she lured Arthas into an ambush. The fallen prince, still consumed by arrogance, did not suspect that his former servant had regained her will. Her banshees surrounded him, their ghostly forms shrieking with fury as they unleashed their wrath upon their former master. Sylvanas herself appeared before him, no longer a puppet but a wraith driven by vengeance. She loosed her arrow, one aimed not merely to wound, but to end the monster who had stolen her life. Yet fate was cruel once more. Before she could deliver the killing blow, the Dreadlord Kel'Thuzad intervened, saving Arthas from her vengeance. Sylvanas's arrow struck true but not fatally, and the Death Knight escaped her grasp. Her chance for immediate revenge slipped away, but she had reclaimed something far greater: her freedom. In the aftermath, Sylvanas realized that vengeance alone would not sustain her people. The undead she had gathered were lost, tormented souls seeking purpose. They were no longer Scourge, but neither were they living. They were something new, forsaken by life, by the Lich King, and by the world itself. From that despair, Sylvanas forged identity. She named them the Forsaken. Under her leadership, they began to carve out a place in the ruined lands of Lordaeron. Sylvanas led them into the dark catacombs beneath the fallen capital, transforming them into a refuge, the Undercity. There, amid decay and shadow, she built a nation for her people. What others would have seen as a tomb, she made a sanctuary. Her voice, sharp and commanding, echoed through the halls. "We are the Forsaken. We will never again be slaves." Her rule was absolute, but not without vision. She knew that survival would require more than hatred. It demanded strength, cunning, and unity. She forged alliances with remnants of the Scourge, with renegade humans, and even with demons who saw opportunity in the chaos. The Dreadlord Varimathras, once her enemy, bent the knee and swore allegiance, a tool she would use to secure her new empire. Though the living above despised and feared them, the Forsaken grew in number and influence. Sylvanas became their queen, not through divine right, but through sheer will. To her people, she was both savior and sovereign, the embodiment of their struggle for autonomy. Her voice, once filled with sorrow, now carried command and purpose. "We are the children of death," she told them. "We will no longer hide from the world that cast us aside. We will make it tremble." And so began the reign of the Banshee Queen, a leader born of tragedy, vengeance, and defiance. The forests of Silvermoon were lost to her forever, but in the darkness beneath Lordaeron a new kingdom rose, one built not upon sunlight and song, but upon the unyielding will of the dead. Sylvanas Windrunner, once Ranger-General of Silvermoon, had become something far more enduring, a queen forged in shadow, destined to change Azeroth forever. Beneath the shattered ruins of Lordaeron, a new kind of kingdom began to take shape, one not born of life but of death itself. The air was thick with decay, the walls wept with rot, and the stench of ruin clung to every stone. Yet in that darkness, Sylvanas Windrunner saw not despair but potential. Where others would see a tomb, she saw a sanctuary. It was here, among the forgotten catacombs of the human capital, that she would build her empire, the Undercity, home of the Forsaken. Her followers were broken remnants of the Scourge, former soldiers, priests, and commoners whose souls had been wrenched from death's embrace. They had no purpose, no hope, and no future. Sylvanas gave them all three. "You are forsaken," she declared, her voice echoing through the hollow chambers, "rejected by the living, hated by the dead. But under my command, you will rise anew. The world cast us aside. We will make it fear us instead." Her words became gospel among the undead. From despair she forged unity. The work of creation began in earnest. With undead hands, the Forsaken reshaped the labyrinth beneath Lordaeron's ruins into something formidable. Stone halls were widened and reinforced. Grotesque machinery pumped foul chemicals through newly carved canals. Apothecaries, the twisted scientists of the Forsaken, brewed toxins and plagues designed not only to defend their Queen-S domain, but to grant them the means to fight back against a world that would see them exterminated. The green glow of their experiments bathed the Undercity in eerie light, reflecting the unnatural life that now thrived below. Sylvanas ruled with an iron will. She had no tolerance for weakness or dissent. Her commands were absolute, her punishments swift. Yet beneath her ruthlessness lay an undeniable vision. The living would never accept the undead. She understood that better than anyone, so she sought power enough to ensure they would never have to beg for it. The Forsaken would be independent, self-sufficient, and strong. Through strategy, cunning, and the shadows of the underworld, she would secure their survival. Though she inspired loyalty, she also instilled fear. Her gaze could silence even the most defiant of her subjects. But among the Forsaken, fear was not shameful, it was respect. They revered her not as a benevolent mother, but as a relentless force of nature. She had freed them from slavery, and in return they gave her unwavering devotion. To them she was salvation, the Banshee Queen who had defied death and promised them freedom in its wake. Her first challenge came from within. The Dreadlord Varimathras, who had once sworn allegiance to her, grew grew restless. As one of the Nathrazim, cunning demons born of deceit, he believed he could manipulate Sylvanas as easily as any mortal, but she had learned too well from her time under Arthas's control. When Varimathras and his demon allies attempted to seize power, she crushed the rebellion with calculated precision. Betrayers were torn apart, and Varimathras himself was forced to his knees, swearing servitude once again. From that moment on, none dared question her rule. Outside the ruins, however, threats loomed. The living despised the undead. To humans, dwarves, and elves alike, the Forsaken were abominations, reminders of plague, death, and horror. Armies marched to purge them. Paladins sought to cleanse the corruption spreading across Lordaeron's fields, but Sylvanas was no stranger to war. She met every threat with ruthless ingenuity. Through ambushes, plagues, and deception, she defended her domain from those who would destroy it. The Forsaken were not numerous, but they were cunning, and under her guidance they became a weapon of terror and survival. Her leadership extended beyond the battlefield. Sylvanas commanded her apothecaries to push the limits of alchemy to develop new means of warfare. They created blight, a deadly plague capable of dissolving flesh and bone alike. It was a weapon meant to ensure that if the living ever brought war to the Forsaken again, they would pay dearly. Her enemies called it monstrous. Sylvanas called it balance. Despite the hatred of the living, Sylvanas understood the importance of politics. When opportunity arose, she sought alliances, not out of trust but necessity. Her emissaries reached out to the Horde, a coalition of orcs, trolls, and tauren, who also sought their place in a world that despised them. Though the Forsaken shared little kinship with these races, Sylvanas saw value in unity. With cunning diplomacy, she convinced the Horde's leaders that her people could serve as powerful allies, securing the Forsaken a place, however uneasy, among them. As the Undercity flourished in its dark splendor, Sylvanas often stood upon the highest balcony, gazing toward the surface where sunlight could no longer reach her. The ruins of Lordaeron above were silent, overgrown, and empty, a monument to the fragility of mortal empires. Yet below, life, or something like it, endured. The Forsaken were thriving, and she was their queen. Not of beauty, not of mercy, but of survival. In her heart, the memory of Silvermoon still lingered, the laughter of her sisters, the glow of the Sunwell, the songs of her people. But those were ghosts now, belonging to a world that no longer wanted her. She had embraced what she had become. If the living saw the Forsaken as monsters, then monsters they would be, unstoppable, unyielding, and united under the will of Sylvanas Windrunner. And so, in the darkness beneath the earth, a new nation was born, forged not in light, but in vengeance, a kingdom of the dead, ruled by the will of a queen who had once been mortal. The Undercity was her throne, the Forsaken her legacy, and her reign had only just begun. For all her strength and cunning, Sylvanas Windrunner knew that survival alone was not enough. The living world above remained a constant threat. Armies of men and dwarves seeking to purge her kind, zealous paladins convinced the undead were nothing but plague given form. To endure, the Forsaken would need allies. Yet who among the living would ever accept the dead? It was an impossible question, one that only Sylvanas could answer. Her solution was simple, not through trust or friendship, but through strategy. When emissaries of the Horde arrived in the Eastern Kingdoms, Sylvanas saw an opportunity. Led by the Orc Warchief thrall, the Horde was a coalition of outcasts, beings once hated and hunted by the Alliance. In them, she saw a reflection of her own people's struggle. But she also saw weakness, compassion, honor, and ideals that bound them to restraint, traits she had long since abandoned. Still, she was pragmatic. If the Forsaken were to thrive, they needed to stand beneath a banner, even one not of their own making. Her first meetings with Thrall were measured, each word weighed with care. The Orc Warchief, though wary, saw value in the Forsaken's control of the northern lands. The Horde needed footholds in the Eastern Kingdoms, and Sylvanas could provide them. She offered resources, intelligence, and soldiers, framing her motives as mutual survival. To Thrall, it was an uneasy alliance born of necessity. To Sylvanas, it was the first step toward security and the quiet expansion of her influence. Within the Undercity, Sylvanas maintained her rule with absolute control. Her most dangerous ally, the Dreadlord Varimathras, still served her after his failed rebellion. The demon had sworn loyalty, but Sylvanas was no fool. She kept him close, watched his every move, and used his knowledge to further her own ends. Varimathras became her shadow advisor, a weapon of cunning she could unleash when diplomacy or brute strength failed. Together, they ensured the Forsaken's position within the Horde remained valuable and feared. To the rest of the Horde's leaders, Sylvanas was an enigma. Fulgen of the Darkspear Trolls distrusted her motives. Cairn Bloodhoof, ever wise, saw in her a spirit driven by vengeance rather than unity. Even Thrall himself admitted to unease when her name was spoken. Yet none could deny her effectiveness. When the Horde required spies, she sent assassins. When they needed soldiers, she unleashed the plague-born might of her people. Her loyalty was functional, precise and calculated. She gave just enough to maintain the alliance while keeping the Forsaken's true ambitions hidden deep beneath the surface. Though the Horde accepted her presence, they could never truly understand her purpose. For Sylvanas, the living were not allies to be trusted, they were tools to be used. Every treaty signed, every battle fought at the Horde's side was a means to an end. What she sought was not merely power or territory, but something far greater, vengeance on a cosmic scale. Arthas still reigned in Northrend, the puppet of the Lich King, and her hatred for him had not faded. Every action she took, every alliance she forged, was a step toward that inevitable reckoning. Her apothecaries continued their dark experiments under the guise of aiding the Horde's war efforts. Deep within the laboratories of the Undercity, they brewed toxins potent enough to melt armies and perfected new strains of blight capable of annihilating both life and undeath alike. When questioned by Thrall, Sylvanas assured him these were defensive measures, tools to protect her people. But privately, she saw them as instruments of liberation, designed for a single purpose, to ensure that no one, living or dead, would ever control her again. Despite her pragmatic alliance, Sylvanas remained isolated. The Forsaken were not truly part of the Horde. They were tolerated, not embraced. To most, they were abominations whose loyalty could never be trusted. Yet Sylvanas thrived in that distrust. It gave her freedom to act in shadows, to move unseen where others were bound by honor. Her spies infiltrated every corner of the Eastern Kingdoms, her influence spreading quietly through whispers and deals struck in the dark. The living saw her as a distant ally. In truth, she was building an empire. There were moments when her mask nearly slipped. When Thrall spoke of redemption and the possibility of peace between races, Sylvanas's cold smile betrayed her disbelief. Peace was a fantasy for the living. The dead had no such illusions. What she wanted was not harmony, but control. The Horde could march beside her so long as it served her goals, but if ever they stood in her way, she would crush them without hesitation. Still, Sylvanas understood the value of patience. Arthas remained her true obsession, the shadow haunting her every thought. Reports from Northrend spoke of his growing weakness, and with each passing year, her resolve hardened. When the time came, she would lead her people north. She would stand before the frozen throne once more, not as a victim, but as vengeance incarnate. And when Frostmourn's master finally fell, she would ensure that the Lich King's reign ended in agony. For now she played her role, Warchief Thrall's ally, the Horde's silent blade, the queen of a nation that thrived beneath the world's contempt. But behind her crimson eyes burned a vision far darker than the Horde could ever imagine. She did not seek peace, nor merely revenge. She sought dominion over death itself. The living had kingdoms of flesh and sunlight. Sylvanas Windrunner was building one of shadow and eternity. The uneasy peace that Sylvanas had forged in Lordaeron was built on deception, shadows, and the fragile trust of monsters. Yet even among the damned, betrayal is inevitable. As the dust of war settled and the world's attention turned elsewhere, Sylvanas's empire beneath the ruins of Lordaeron began to fracture from within. The Dreadlords, Varimathras, Deatharok, and Balnazar, who had once served the Lich King, saw opportunity in chaos. And Sylvanas, still consolidating her rule, was about to face a rebellion that would test her cunning and cruelty like never before. After Arthas's withdrawal to Northrend, the power vacuum in the Plaguelands left 1,000 rival factions clawing for dominance. The Dreadlords, long bound by infernal pacts, had been left behind when the Scourge splintered. They no longer served the Frozen Throne, but neither did they intend to bow to Sylvanas. To them, she was merely another pawn to manipulate, a temporary ruler of corpses who could be disposed of when the time came. But Sylvanas was no pawn. She had been forged in humiliation, sharpened by rage and taught by the cruelty of death itself. She would not fall to demons. For a time, Varimathras continued to serve her loyally, at least in appearance. He offered information, counsel, and power, all tools she accepted with deliberate caution. But as whispers of conspiracy grew louder, Sylvanas began to sense the deception festering around her. Deathrok and Balnazar had seized control of portions of Lordaeron's human remnants, installing a puppet regime under the human General Garithos. This arrogant commander, who once led Alliance survivors, despised both elves and undead. He saw Sylvanas not as an ally, but as a means to reclaim the ruins of his homeland. When Garithos struck his alliance with her, Sylvanas knew his intentions were poisoned with prejudice. Yet she played along, concealing her disgust beneath the calm precision of her words. Together they assaulted Deathrok's forces, striking swiftly and decisively. Sylvanas' strategy was flawless. She used Garithos' human troops as expendable shields, while her Forsaken assassins and Banshees dismantled the Dreadlord's operations from within. Deathrok's stronghold fell, and Garithos, convinced of his own brilliance, basked in a victory that belonged entirely to her. But Garithos' arrogance would soon lead him to his doom. Once the Dreadlord was slain, Sylvanas' usefulness to him had ended in his mind. He turned on her, ordering her execution and seeking to claim the ruins of Lordaeron for himself. It was a fatal mistake. Sylvanas did not beg or bargain. She simply waited. Varimathras, seeing the tide shift once more, betrayed his own kind. He struck against his brothers, aligning himself with Sylvanas in a desperate attempt to survive her wrath. Together, they turned Garithos' trap into a massacre. In a single night, the betrayal collapsed inward. Garithos and his army were annihilated, their corpses added to the Forsaken's ranks. Deathrok fell next, torn apart by the same undead he had sought to enslave. Balnazar alone escaped, vanishing into the shadows to plot another day. And when the carnage ended, Sylvanas stood victorious once more, her enemies dead, her rivals scattered, her power unchallenged. Yet this victory was not one of triumph or celebration. It was the victory of a survivor who had long since lost the ability to trust. Varimathras, kneeling before her, begged for mercy. He had betrayed his brothers and sworn absolute loyalty to her. Most rulers might have executed him out of caution, but Sylvanas saw value in keeping him alive. "Serve me," she said coldly, "and live. Fail me and die as they did." With those words, she chained the Dreadlord to her will, not through loyalty, but through fear. It was a lesson she had learned from Arthas himself, that power rooted in terror lasts longer than power rooted in faith. The aftermath of Garithos' betrayal marked a turning point in Sylvanas' rule. She no longer saw alliances as tools of diplomacy. They were weapons, temporary conveniences to be discarded once their purpose was fulfilled. The humans of Lordaeron were gone, the Dreadlords broken, and the Forsaken stood alone beneath their queen's iron command. No more compromises, no more pretense of cooperation. From that moment on, Sylvanas vowed that her people would serve no one, not the living, not demons, not even the gods themselves. Her ruthlessness deepened. Within Undercity's black corridors, whispers of rebellion vanished overnight. Those who questioned her methods disappeared, their screams echoing through stone halls before being silenced forever. The apothecaries redoubled their efforts, breeding plagues and toxins deadlier than ever before. The Forsaken became not merely a nation of survivors, but a weaponized force of despair, an army that reflected the cold, unfeeling cruelty of their queen. And yet, beneath her stoic composure, a familiar emptiness grew. Each betrayal she endured, each life she took, each victory she claimed, all of it brought no peace, no satisfaction. Her hatred for Arthas still burned, but even vengeance had begun to feel hollow. The Dreadlords had shown her how fragile trust truly was. Garithos had reminded her that the living would never see her as anything more than an abomination. And so she built her kingdom in darkness, a fortress of the forgotten, ruled by a queen who had learned that survival demanded not compassion, but absolute control. Sylvanas Windrunner emerged from these betrayals more calculating than ever before. The Banshee Queen had been tempered by death, betrayal, and deceit, and from those fires she had forged something terrifying. She no longer sought to reclaim what was lost, nor to find redemption in the eyes of the living. She now sought something else entirely, to claim dominion over all that was left, and to ensure that no power in this world or the next could ever again break her will. For years, the spectre of Arthas Menethil haunted Sylvanas Windrunner's every waking thought. His voice lingered in her memories, his cruelty etched into the remnants of her shattered soul. She had survived betrayal, outlasted demons, and forged a kingdom in the shadows, but none of it mattered. The Lich King still sat upon his frozen throne in Northrend, untouched and unpunished. Every night, Sylvanas dreamed of the moment his cold eyes would close forever. Every choice she made, every life taken, every alliance broken had been in service of that singular purpose: vengeance. When word spread that the Lich King's strength was faltering, Sylvanas knew her moment had come. The scourge stirred once more, and the Horde, united with the Alliance in an uneasy truce, set sail for Northrend to end his reign. Yet for Sylvanas, this was not a campaign of conquest or honor. It was personal. The frozen wastelands of Northrend were where her story had been shattered, and where it would finally be made whole again. The Forsaken marched north, their queen at the forefront. They were not driven by duty, but by shared hatred. Hatred for the one who had enslaved them, who had turned their lives into nightmares. Sylvanas's vengeance became their purpose. In the icy wastes of Dragonblight and the frozen plains of Icecrown, her banshees clashed with the scourge, their spectral wails echoing through the howling winds. The Horde called her reckless, the Alliance called her monstrous, but none could deny her precision and ferocity. Wherever Sylvanas led, death followed, swift, efficient, and merciless. When the combined forces of Azeroth began their assault on Icecrown's citadel, Sylvanas's hatred reached its zenith. Every step through that cursed fortress brought back memories of her own death, of the moment Arthas tore the life from her body and bound her spirit in chains. Now she was the one who commanded death, and she intended to make him suffer for every scream he had ever caused. As the heroes of the Horde and Alliance stormed the frozen throne, Sylvanas lingered in the shadows, watching as destiny unfolded. When the final battle came, and Arthas Menethil, the Lich King, finally fell, Sylvanas stood upon the ramparts of Icecrown and stared into the storm. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction. The man who had destroyed her life lay broken in the snow, his cursed helm cast aside, his soul dragged into the abyss. For years she had dreamed of this moment, had imagined his screams, his defeat, his end. Yet now, with her vengeance fulfilled, all she felt was silence. The hatred that had fueled her for so long flickered and died, leaving only a hollow void. She watched as Bolvar for Dragon, a noble paladin who had once fought against her kind, took the helm of domination to contain the scourge. "There must always be a Lich King," he said, his voice burning with sacrifice. Sylvanas turned away. To her it was just another cycle, another chain, one tyrant replaced by another. The victory felt false, incomplete. Arthas was gone, yet his shadow lingered. The world saw justice. Sylvanas saw only emptiness. Returning to the Undercity, she was a queen without purpose. Her vengeance, the foundation of her existence, had been achieved, and with it the last tether of meaning unraveled. Nights passed without rest. The echoes of her past grew louder. The whispers of the damned, her own victims, her own soldiers, clawed at her sanity. What remained for someone who had already defied life and death? For the first time since her rebirth, Sylvanas felt something close to fear, not of enemies but of herself. Driven by despair, she returned to Icecrown, the place where her life had ended and been twisted beyond recognition. She stood before the frozen throne once more, staring into the abyss, and saw nothing staring back. There was no peace in vengeance, no redemption in survival. All she had left was pain, the endless weight of existence without purpose. So she stepped forward, casting herself from the heights of Icecrown into the icy void below. Her body shattered upon the frozen ground, her spirit slipping into the darkness beyond. But death did not embrace her. Instead, she found herself drifting in an endless void, surrounded by whispers and shadows, the realm between life and the afterlife. And there, something ancient took notice. The Valkyr, servants of the Lich King, approached her with an offer. To return not as his slave, but as a master of her own fate. They saw in her a strength that even death could not extinguish. In exchange for their service, she would carry their purpose, to keep the balance between the living and the dead. When Sylvanas rose again, it was not with joy or relief. It was with cold determination. Her fall had stripped away the last fragments of her old self. No longer a ranger, no longer a mere queen of the Forsaken, she had become something else, something darker. Her hatred for Arthas had died with him, but her defiance of the cycle of life and death had only grown. She began to see the world itself as her enemy, a place ruled by meaningless suffering and endless hypocrisy. To the world, Sylvanas' resurrection was another legend in a long war. To her it was revelation. If even vengeance could not fill the void, then perhaps she would find purpose not in destroying one tyrant, but in unmaking the very order of existence that allowed such tyranny to thrive. And so, the Banshee Queen turned her gaze beyond Azeroth, toward the secrets of death itself, where she would soon meet forces far more terrible and far more powerful than Arthas ever was. Arthas was dead, the frozen throne silent, and yet Sylvanas Windrunner felt no relief. The vengeance that had defined her existence for decades, the hatred that had driven her to defy the Lich King, the Scourge, and even the living, had evaporated into nothingness. She stood atop the jagged spires of Icecrown, staring at the frozen wasteland below. Her heart, once filled with purpose, now pulsed with emptiness. The enemy she had sought for so long had fallen, and with him, the singular meaning of her existence had crumbled. Alone, she allowed herself to feel the weight of her years, the lives she had taken, the sacrifices she had demanded from her people, the horrors she had endured. Each memory was a dagger, twisting in the void left by Arthas' death. She had survived death itself once, and yet now she felt a yearning for something more, a release, an escape from the ceaseless burden of immortality and loss. The thought of stepping from the precipice into the icy abyss was not born of fear or cowardice, but of exhaustion. The cycle of life and death, of vengeance and bloodshed had grown unbearable. And so Sylvanas leapt. The frozen winds whipped around her as the ground raced to meet her, but death, once again, was not her end. Instead, she fell into a void of shadows and whispers, a liminal space between life and the afterlife, where time had no meaning and existence itself felt suspended. Here in the darkness, she was met by beings both terrifying and beautiful, the Valkyr, winged servants of the Lich King. Their presence was chilling, yet compelling. They did not speak with words, but with thought, their intent clear. They had watched her survive what should have destroyed her, and they saw in her something few mortals could ever comprehend, an unbroken will. The Valkyr offered her a choice. Death had claimed her once, but they could grant her a return, not as a slave to the Lich King, not as a pawn of fate, but as a master of her own existence. They revealed glimpses of what lay beyond death, the cycles of the afterlife, the domains of spirits, and the unseen forces that bound the living and the dead. They whispered truths that had been denied her as a mortal, showing her how death was not the end, but a tool to command. To wield it was to escape oblivion. To embrace it fully was to transcend the fragile limits of life. Sylvanas accepted. She felt the icy embrace of their power and the surge of control it offered. No longer would she be bound by the mistakes of her past, nor constrained by mortal morality. She returned to the world with new knowledge, with perspective that few could understand, and with motivations darker than ever before. The Forsaken still followed her, their loyalty unquestioned, but Sylvanas' gaze no longer lingered on mere vengeance. Her enemies were no longer limited to Arthas, the living, or even the undead. The very rules of existence The cycles of life and death became her canvas, a canvas upon which she would paint her will. Her first moments back in Azeroth were quiet, almost contemplative. The frozen wastes of Icecrown faded behind her, replaced by the ruins of Lordaeron and the Undercity she had built. Her people still looked to her with reverence, unaware that their queen had glimpsed the realms beyond mortality. Yet even in their devotion, she saw imperfection, weakness, hesitation, and attachment. Those traits, once necessary for survival, now seemed frivolous to her. Sylvanas had seen what lay beyond life, and she understood that attachment was a chain stronger than any blade, any plague, any army. Her thoughts turned toward the living, toward the so-called heroes who would dare to challenge her people, toward the balance that governed existence. In the shadow of her newfound understanding, she began to plan, not small acts of vengeance, but sweeping movements of fate itself. The Forsaken would no longer merely survive. They would thrive, dominate, and reshape the world according to her vision. Her leadership would not be questioned. Her power would not be challenged. She would bend death to her will, using the knowledge granted by the Valkyr as both sword and shield. And so, Sylvanas's descent into darkness deepened. The Banshee Queen was no longer simply a survivor or avenger. She was something else entirely. Her compassion had withered, her mercy extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating purpose. She understood the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the power that lay in commanding both. She returned to Azeroth not to reclaim lost vengeance, but to assert dominion over a world that had never understood her, a world that she now saw as a stage for her own eternal will. The Forsaken thrived under her renewed vision, yet even they did not fully comprehend the transformation of their queen. Sylvanas had glimpsed the void beyond mortality, and in doing so had been reborn, not as a creature of grief or hatred, but as an architect of fate itself. Her shadow stretched across Azeroth, longer and colder than ever before, a reminder to all that Sylvanas Windrunner was no longer just a queen of the dead. She was a force beyond death, and her story had only begun its darkest chapter. Sylvanas Windrunner had returned from the void with a new understanding of death and power, but she knew that knowledge alone would not secure her people's place in Azeroth. The Forsaken had survived for decades under her guidance, carving out a kingdom beneath Lordaeron, yet the living remained a constant threat. They hated her people, feared her army, and coveted the lands she called home. To ensure their survival, she needed influence far beyond the Undercity. She needed the Horde itself. Her ascent to the Warchief's seat was not immediate, nor was it unopposed. The leaders of the Horde had seen her cunning and her ruthlessness, yet they feared the consequences of allowing a Banshee to wield such power over their alliance. Still, the Horde was fractured after years of war, leadership weak and indecisive, and Sylvanas used that uncertainty to her advantage. Through subtle manipulation, strategic alliances, and calculated threats, she placed herself at the heart of Horde politics. Thrall, Vol'jin, and Bane Bloodhoof had all recognized her potential, but none had foreseen how far she would take her vision. Once Warchief, Sylvanas moved swiftly. She strengthened the Forsaken's role within the Horde, ensuring that their influence extended into military and diplomatic spheres. She cultivated spies, sharpened her assassins, and used her knowledge of death to manipulate situations unseen. No enemy was too far, no plan too intricate, and no betrayal too subtle to escape her notice. In her hands, the Horde became a tool, a weapon not only of survival, but of preemptive strike. Her enemies would never see her moves until it was too late. And yet, Sylvanas's vision extended far beyond conventional warfare. She had seen the fragility of life and the inevitability of death, and she began to embrace a doctrine of extremity, a belief that to secure true freedom and survival, she must act decisively without hesitation or moral hesitation. Night Elf lands had long been out of reach, sacred and untouchable, yet they symbolized the living world's contempt for the undead. To strike fear and demonstrate the Horde's unflinching strength, she ordered the World Tree set ablaze. The night sky turned crimson, the flames swallowing the ancient forests as civilians fled in terror. The burning of Teldrassil was more than a tactical move. it was a statement. To the Alliance, she was monstrous, a villain beyond redemption, and to many within the Horde, her methods sparked unease. Yet to her, it was clarity incarnate. Survival required ruthless action, and fear was a currency no weaker than loyalty. She had shown the living that the Forsaken and their queen would not be trifled with. From the ashes of Teldrassil, the Fourth War ignited. The Alliance retaliated with fury, and the world plunged into conflict once more. Sylvanas' strategies and manipulation ensured that the Horde, under her command, gained early advantage, exploiting chaos and division among their enemies. Yet in the shadows, her motivations were personal as well as political. Every battle, every death, every victory was a step toward asserting not just Horde supremacy, but her own dominion, a redefinition of power in Azeroth that placed the Forsaken and herself at its center. Her leadership polarized opinion. To some, she was visionary, guiding the Horde with precision and foresight where previous Warchiefs had faltered. To others, she was a monster, a Banshee Queen whose lust for power and disregard for life had corrupted the Horde itself. Even among her closest advisors, questions lingered. Did the ends justify the means? Was Sylvanas truly acting for her people, or for something darker that even they could not comprehend? She offered no answers, only results. The Horde survived, the Forsaken thrived, and her enemies trembled. Yet beneath her calculated exterior, Sylvanas herself wrestled with the void she had glimpsed beyond death. She had seen the futility of vengeance, the emptiness of revenge fulfilled, and the impermanence of mortal power. Her ambition now encompassed more than armies or kingdoms. It extended to life, death, and the cycles that governed existence itself. Every act of war, every shocking betrayal, every calculated strike was designed to challenge the natural order, to reshape a world that had never accepted her or her people. By the time the Fourth War reached its height, Sylvanas had cemented her duality. She was both savior and destroyer, liberator and tyrant, villain and visionary. To her enemies, she was the shadow of death made flesh, unrelenting and merciless. To her people, she was the guarantor of survival, a leader whose ruthlessness ensured they would never again be enslaved. Her reign as Warchief was not just about territory or conquest. It was about redefining what it meant to wield power in a world that feared and reviled her very existence. In the end, Sylvanas Windrunner's actions during this period solidified her place in history. She had transcended her origins as a Ranger-General of Silvermoon to become something far greater and far darker. A queen, a Warchief, and a force of nature capable of bending life, death, and fear to her will. Her name became synonymous with terror and ingenuity alike, a legend that would haunt Azeroth for generations, and a shadow that would never be fully extinguished. Sylvanas Windrunner's reign as Warchief had always been a tightrope walked over fire and shadow. Her rule combined fear, strategy, and the relentless precision of a predator. Yet even a predator faces challenges from its own pack, and for Sylvanas, that challenge came from within the Horde itself. The very people she had once led, those who owed their survival to her cunning, began to question the cost of her ambition. Their whispers became accusations, and their loyalty wavered. Sylvanas, ever perceptive, sensed the fracture forming in the foundation of her empire. High Warlord Saurfang, the embodiment of the Horde's honor and tradition, confronted her openly. He had witnessed the burning of Teldrassil, the escalating war, and the ruthless machinations that had marked her tenure. In his eyes, Sylvanas had become a tyrant, a shadow of the Horde's ideals, and a threat to the very people she had sworn to protect. When he challenged her leadership, she did not respond with words alone. She met him in battle, a duel of strength and conviction that would decide not just honor but the soul of the Horde. The confrontation was brutal, a clash of wills as much as weapons. Saurfang, seasoned by countless campaigns, fought with honor and integrity. Sylvanas, shaped by betrayal, death, and the knowledge of what lies beyond, fought with cold calculation and merciless precision. Every strike, every parry reflected her philosophy, survival and dominance above all else. She bested Saurfang not out of desire for blood, but because she had long learned that weakness could not be tolerated, neither in her enemies nor in her allies. Her victory over Saurfang marked a turning point. Standing over the fallen hero, she did not gloat, nor did she attempt to reassure those who watched. Instead, she made a declaration that stunned the remaining leaders of the Horde. The Horde is nothing. Its ideals, its honor, its so-called unity, all meaningless. I am no longer bound by its constraints, or by the vision of those who came before me. My path is my own. With these words, she severed the final ties to the organization she had once led, rejecting the very coalition that had elevated her to power. In the chaos that followed, Sylvanas vanished. Her disappearance was sudden, leaving the Horde to contend with the aftermath of her actions, the anger of the Alliance, the moral outrage of her own people, and the uncertain vacuum of leadership. The Forsaken remained loyal, but even they sensed a shift. Their queen was no longer concerned with survival, or with alliances, or with the approval of the living. Her motives were no longer legible, even to those who had followed her for decades. She had become an agent of her own design, operating on a scale beyond comprehension. From the shadows, Sylvanas began to pursue a plan only she understood. Every move, every alliance, every strike of war was calculated toward an end that remained hidden. The veil of secrecy she had perfected over her long life, and her second life beyond death, became absolute. She struck when least expected, vanished before retaliation, and manipulated events on a scale that few could trace. Her enemies, both Horde and Alliance, could see the results but never the intent. The Queen, who had once been a general, a ruler, and a warchief, had become a force operating entirely apart from conventional morality or allegiance. Her detachment from Azeroth's factions was not mere rebellion, it was evolution. Sylvanas no longer needed validation from the living, nor did she desire the hollow loyalty of the Horde. She was a shadow of death incarnate, a wraith whose understanding of fate and mortality placed her beyond the reach of mortal concerns. Her decisions were guided by knowledge few could possess, by visions of outcomes beyond the comprehension of ordinary beings, and by an unyielding will that refused compromise. Even as whispers of her actions spread, acts of sabotage, sudden strikes, and manipulations that reshaped the political landscape, Sylvanas remained distant. She had learned the hard way that trust is fragile, and power cannot be maintained without fear as well as respect. From the shadows, she orchestrated events that would destabilize kingdoms, test alliances, and challenge the very notions of life, death, and authority. Her enemies perceived only chaos, her allies, confusion. Only Sylvanas understood the architecture of her plan. In rejecting the Horde and the Alliance, Sylvanas embraced an identity beyond labels. She was no longer simply a queen, a warchief, or a Ranger-General. She had transcended mortal hierarchies, stepping into a domain where her ambition, knowledge, and mastery over death defined her purpose. Every action she took was a step along a path invisible to all but herself, a path that would ultimately reshape Azeroth according to her vision, one that defied both morality and comprehension. In that moment, Sylvanas Windrunner became untethered from all allegiance, a force guided solely by the dark calculus of her own will, ready to enact a plan that would alter the very fabric of the world. The shadows that Sylvanas Windrunner had long embraced eventually led her to a realm beyond mortal understanding, the Shadowlands. After severing her ties with the Horde and the living, her ambitions extended beyond Azeroth itself. She had glimpsed the void between life and death, had understood the fragile architecture of souls and mortality, and now she sought to reshape that structure entirely. The realms of the dead, which had once seemed a prison or a tool, became a battlefield where her will might reign supreme. Her most dangerous alliance was forged with the Jailer, the enigmatic and malevolent entity who ruled the Maw, the prison for the irredeemable dead. The Jailer offered promises that appealed to her deepest desires: power beyond life, dominion over the cycle of souls, and a chance to undo the cosmic injustices that had haunted her since her death at Arthas' hands. Sylvanas, now tempered by centuries of betrayal, suffering, and survival, accepted his counsel with caution, yet her ambition overrode prudence. To her, the Jailer was a means, not a master. Together, they conceived a plan to shatter the boundaries that separated life from death, to rewrite the rules that even gods dared not challenge. Her plan was audacious, to collapse the veil between the Shadowlands and Azeroth, creating a world where death could be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately dominated. She sought not just vengeance or survival. She sought to become the arbiter of souls themselves. The Forsaken, the Horde, and even the greatest heroes of Azeroth were pawns in her grand design. Every strike, every subtle maneuver, every clandestine alliance was calculated to bring her closer to a new order, one where Sylvanas Windrunner's will was the ultimate law. Yet as she ascended the heights of power within the Shadowlands, the consequences of her choices became undeniable. The cosmic balance, which governs the flow of souls and the natural cycle of life and death, resisted her intrusion. Forces far older and more potent than mortal armies began to converge against her. Her alliances frayed. Even the jailer's motivations proved inscrutable, revealing layers of deception that mirrored those Sylvanas had once mastered herself. In pursuing ultimate control, she had underestimated the immutable laws of existence. The confrontation was inevitable. Sylvanas found herself facing not just the forces of the Shadowlands, but the full weight of her own past. Every death she had caused, every betrayal she had endured or enacted, every life she had touched with cruelty or protection came back to confront her. Spectres of her sisters, of Arthas, of the countless dead she had led and manipulated, appeared, reminders of the cost of defying the natural order. The Banshee Queen, once untouchable in her cunning and ruthlessness, now faced a reckoning that no strategy or shadow could evade. In the final battle, Sylvanas fought with all the skill, fury, and cunning she had acquired over centuries. Yet the forces arrayed against her were not merely enemies. They were reflections of herself, manifestations of guilt, vengeance, and the cosmic balance she had attempted to disrupt. The duel was not only physical, but metaphysical, a contest of wills and destiny, a collision between mortality and the eternal. Every blow she struck, every spell she cast, revealed the extent of her transformation from mortal Ranger-General to the master of undeath, and finally, to a being confronted by the limits of her own ambition. In the end, Sylvanas was brought low, not by a weapon or an army, but by the realization that even death has laws that cannot be bent without consequence. The jailer's influence was undone, his promises revealed as manipulations, and Sylvanas herself faced judgment from the Eternal Ones, the custodians of the Shadowlands who govern the balance of souls. Her punishment was not annihilation, but reflection. She was made to witness, understand, and endure the suffering she had wrought, the lives she had manipulated, and the void her relentless pursuit of power had created. It was an introspection that stretched across time, memory, and existence itself. Yet even in judgment, there was redemption. Through her trials, Sylvanas glimpsed the possibility of atonement. The Banshee Queen, who had lived and died and risen beyond all mortal limits, began to understand that true power does not come from domination or fear, but from purpose, tempered by compassion, restraint, and understanding. Her actions in the Shadowlands became a crucible, harsh, unyielding, and transformative. By the time her sentence concluded, she emerged altered, no longer the vengeful spirit defined by hatred or ambition, but a soul reconciled with its past, aware of its limitations, and capable of wielding influence without succumbing to corruption. Returning, Sylvanas carried with her the memory of her journey through death, power, and judgment. Her people, the Forsaken and the world of Azeroth, would see her anew, not merely as a queen, warchief, or villain, but as a being who had confronted the ultimate consequences of her choices. She had walked through the shadows between life and death, had flirted with godlike power, and had faced the echoes of her own existence. From this crucible, Sylvanas Windrunner emerged not unscathed but enlightened, the full circle of a soul who had defied death itself, and learned at last the cost and the meaning of true mastery. Her story concluded with reflection, not finality. Sylvanas's journey through life, death, vengeance, and redemption serves as a testament to resilience, ambition, and transformation. She had been hero, villain, tyrant, and savior. Yet ultimately, she became something beyond labels, a soul reconciled with mortality, immortality, and the consequences of her choices. And in that, her legacy endured, shadowed and luminous, a reminder that even those who defy death must eventually confront it, and through that confrontation, find their own redemption.